Mark Jaynes, the voice of IndyCar Radio. Thanks for joining us on Inside Morgan County.
It's a pleasure. Really cool, for sure. I mean, you and I have a little bit of a history. I was talking to your dad before we went on, and I think you were a fourth grader the first time we met at WCBK in Martinsville, and what a long and winding road we've been on since, huh?
It is. I'm glad that we've kept in touch, though.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's start at the beginning. What's your connection to Morgan County?
In the late 1960s, we were living on the east side of Indianapolis, and my grandparents at first decided that they wanted to get back to rural living, which they had been a part of when they were early on in their marriage as my father's parents. And I think my dad was a little concerned that maybe the east side of Indianapolis at that time wasn't necessarily the best place to raise a young family. And so they found two 10-acre tracts side by side about 3.5 miles south of Monrovia on Baltimore Road.
Okay.
And my grandparents moved out there first. My grandfather dug the basement of his home out with a Ford tractor that he had bought and a rear blade. He worked at the rail yard in Avon and essentially built his own house. They lived in a camper for a while he was building the house, and then about 1.5 years later, we followed them out there. And so I was born in Indianapolis, but certainly Morgan County and Monrovia is my home.
Absolutely. When did you decide you wanted to be into radio?
Well, I didn't really decide that. Niall Denny was my elementary school principal at Hall Elementary, and I was in 6th grade, and I was coming off the playground at recess, and he stopped me, and as he was known to do with 6th graders, and say, have you given any thought to what you want to do with your life? And I said, yeah, no doubt. I said, I'm going to be a Major League Baseball player. And he said, well, I watched you play softball at recess for a couple of days, and you might want to rethink that because you're not very good. And he said, but with your inability to keep your mouth shut, your obvious love of sports, he said, I would think that journalism or broadcasting might be a more profitable venture. Your odds are better of having success there. So we went into his office, and he suggested that I, start tying everything that I do in school to some aspect of broadcasting, radio, and television. So if I had a science project, I did it over weather forecasting, and I would write letters, because there was no email in those days, to Stan Wood at Channel 8 and Bob McLean at Channel 6 and Bob Gregory at Channel 13, and they would send me cloud charts and stuff, and I would do my science project over that. And I gained an interest in communications as a whole, and my parents bought me a realistic cassette recorder that Christmas, and I would sit on the floor of their living room and watch games on television and do play-by-play. And I would cue up records on an old RCA turntable that we had, 45s, and time into the songs and record that. And I would make up mock Indianapolis 500s.
Really?
And and I would interview friends of mine, as drivers of the day. So, one thing led to another. Got involved in high school sports, and was also taking journalism. And then my sophomore year, Dave Sockel was the sports director at WCBK in Martinsville. And Dave asked me to came in, and our football coach and athletic director at the time, the late Wayne Staley, recommended me to do 5-minute sports reports for WCBK on Monrovia football and basketball. I got paid a whopping $5 a game. I had to call my report in by 11 p.m. on game night. And if I got halfway through the season and I missed my deadline, then whatever money that I'd made to that point was wiped out. I had to start over.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't get paid until the season was over. And so, I did that for 3 years in high school. And then, Dave Keister apparently saw something and offered me a full-time morning news position. I have to say full-time. It was consistent. It was Monday through Friday, and going in and doing morning news. And then I started just, I worked the Christmas Music Spectacular. I worked Saturday nights. I worked Sunday mornings, whatever they needed me to do. So that's kind of in the condensed version of how it all began.
And so when did you start the morning show? that's when you and I met. Was
oh well,
you and Dave?
I had left. I left the Martinsville station and actually went to WLSO in Spencer because Dave Sockel, who gave me the opportunity at WCBK, had become the general manager for that station. And so I worked there for a while, did sales and some on-air stuff, and I just didn't think my career was going anywhere. And so I started working at a warehouse grocery store, Cub Foods, here in Indianapolis. And then a girl that I was dating at the time, her mother was a school teacher, and she strongly suggested that I go to college. And so I applied at Indiana University. They wanted me to take some courses to beef up my math and English, but Indiana State was taking about anybody and everybody at the time. And so I went to ISU and started working at the campus station. And about a year and a half into my tenure at Indiana State, I got a full-time job at WTHI Radio. And that was in 1985, and I worked there until 1990. And then, and that's when my wife and I had met at Indiana State and gotten married, and we had our daughter Lauren. And I wanted my parents and my wife's parents to have involvement in our children's lives. And I felt like that would have been difficult to do with us living in Terre Haute and them being here. So I then had an opportunity to come back to WCBK.
Okay.
And I was there for 4 years, from 90 to 94, and that's when we met.
Okay. So growing up, how did you spend race day?
Oh, like everybody else did in Indiana, I think, that didn't come to the race. I mean, you immediately went out to the backyard and you had the old scorecard on the front page of the Indianapolis Star, and your parents and you would discuss what drivers that you thought would win, and Dad would get the grill out, and some friends would come over from time to time, and we'd listen to it on the IMS Radio Network.
Yeah, great memories. Okay, switching now to Morgan County stuff. Do you have a favorite place you like to eat in Morgan County?
Well, about 5 years ago, I moved to Speedway. To be closer to our children. And at the time, I was teaching at Beech Grove, and my wife is an academic advisor at IUPUI. My mother I had built a house on property that once was owned by my grandparents, and my mother was living next door. I had lost my father. He had passed away. And my mom decided to be a full-time Florida resident. And so there really wasn't anything out there for she and I, and it really didn't fit our lifestyle at the time. So we made the difficult decision to sell, because my mother told me that she was going to sell. And so we've been in Speedway for about 5 years now, but I'd say sticking with my loyalty and dedication to Monrovia, I mean, Doghouse Pizza is probably my favorite place to eat. But when I was in Martinsville, I think by law you were required to go to Forky's so many days a week. And then I can remember the staff at WCBK, we used to go to Mr. Gaddy's a lot for the buffet for sure.
Yeah. I've been thinking about Gray's a lot lately.
Yeah, Gray's and Poe's. I saw the Poe's in Mooresville closed fairly recently, and that's certainly the end of an era. But yeah, during the summertime, I have a friend of mine who's retired who loves Gray Brothers, and so, whenever I buy something for my classroom and we take it out to Monrovia, we certainly make sure that we stop at Gray Brothers cafeteria for sure.
So obviously, how many fans are here on race day approximately?
300,000 plus. I mean, all told. I mean, it's Kurt Cavan, who's now with IndyCar in a media relations position. He's a director of digital content, but Kurt, of course, a long-time writer for the Indianapolis Star. I forget the number he settled upon, but to the best of his ability, he counted every seat in this place several years ago.
Oh, wow.
Some of the bleachers have been removed going into turn number 3 and just prior to the short shoot. And I would say people have figured out that there are places here where the sight lines aren't very good and those tickets typically don't sell. But I think when you encompass everyone in the suites and everyone in the infield here, I mean, it's easily over 300,000 people.
And not all of those people, where I'm going with this is not all of those people just drive here the day of. They're staying here. They're staying in hotels and things like that. They're traveling in. What is the impact, if any, that the race has on Morgan County?
Oh, I think that there probably, there's a fair amount of hotel business. People stay as far away as Martinsville, if not farther away. I know The hotels at the I-70 Cloverdale exit, I think, book up every year for the month of May and well in advance. I think there's an economic impact that probably is felt in all of the counties surrounding Marion County during the month of May for sure.
Yeah. Last question on the Morgan County subject. What makes Morgan County so special? Obviously, you're not living there now, but it's in your heart.
Yeah, I mean,
you work there.
Yeah, I've had I had 5 wonderful years at Beech Grove, but simply put, I don't know that I'm in the position professionally that I'm in without my time spent at Monrovia High School and in Morgan County. I think it's still a very safe place with all of the ills that there are in this world. I think it's still a very safe place to raise a family. I think it's maintained a level of intimacy. I mean, there's some indications that, for instance, with some of the growth that we're experiencing on the north side of Monrovia toward 39, with the expansion of the Homestead subdivision, that I see when I come in the morning from Indianapolis, that fearful of becoming a bit of a bedroom community where people just come in, spend the night, get up the next morning and go. And they don't maybe have the ties as strong as we did, say, maybe 10 or 15 years ago. But I think Martinsville, certainly Eminence, Paragon, and some of those other Morgan County communities certainly have done a really good job of hanging on to their history and tradition while certainly moving forward and progressing.
Did you ever think that you'd be the voice of the Indy 500?
No, I mean, when I joined the network in 1996, I was working for the Holman George family at the time at WTHI in Terre Haute. And actually in 1995, my boss at the time was the entertainment director at the State Fair, and I was his first assistant. And John Royer was in charge. He and Tom Alabrandy managed the sound system at the fairgrounds, but also were involved with the sound system here. And John was a producer and affiliate relations manager. And John and I struck up a friendship. And John was the one that strongly encouraged me in 1995 to get involved with the radio network because I was already, quote unquote, in the family. Mm-hmm. And they were expanding because the IRO was being formed at that time, splitting off from CART. And they were going to broadcast all of the races. And I knew that the management at WTHI was supportive of me, being gone and traveling. And so I sent Bob Jenkins an air check and a resume because, again, no email at that time. And they announced the lineup of talent for Walt Disney World in 1996 in January, and I wasn't part of that. And then the Phoenix race rolled around, and I wasn't part of that and didn't hear anything from anybody. And then Mike King, who was the anchor at the time, who I had worked closely with at WTHI, was up here for the delivery of the pace cars. And he came to the chamber dinner that night in Terre Haute at Holman Center, and he said, "Hey, I think you're going to get a phone call." And sure enough, I did. And we came up here for a client day. We used to get one of the Holman suites and bring our clients up, and I interviewed with Bob Jenkins that day, and then I got the call and joined the network in 1996, the second weekend of qualifying for the 500. And I remember race day vividly. I didn't sleep the night before. I sat out on the front porch of my home in Mooresville at the time all night long. My wife kept coming out, "You okay?" "No, I'm not okay, but I can't sleep." And so I got here. I went back to the garage area. I interviewed Buzz Calkins, who was the series points co-leader at the time. And I was doing okay with it, even when I was introduced for the first time. And then we were walking out of Gasoline Alley, and Mike King was a pit reporter at that time. And Mike stopped, and he said, "Welcome to the big time." And I looked up at this mass of humanity and almost passed out. But lucky for me, I got my legs underneath me and did my job. And when I went home that night, my wife said, "How do you think it went?" And I said, "I think everyone was happy." I said, "But if they don't ask me back and if I never do it again, I've done it one more time than a lot of guys get to." Mm-hmm. So the last now 24 years, I've been playing with house money as far as I'm concerned, as they say. And, I didn't even know how much it paid until I got the check because the interview never came up. Because you can't, and I think you've seen me in interviews, I've said this before, you simply can't put a price tag on something like that. I mean, right. it's the fulfillment of a lifelong dream. And so when someone's offering you that opportunity, you really don't care at the time about the money that's involved.
And that was as a pit reporter.
Yeah, that's right.
And you weren't even thinking about the anchor chair
Oh,
at
no,
that point.
no, not
You were
at
just
all.
glad to be doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I was a pit reporter for about 4 years. And then in 2000, I went to Turn 3, and I was there for 15 years. And then, Mike had pretty much solidified himself as the anchor of this network. Well, Mike had gotten out of broadcasting full time and took a job doing marketing and PR for Union Hospital. And because of how condensed our schedule became, Mike was working 75 or 80 days in a row. But by that time, we had added Indy Lights, which is one of our support series, and I was anchoring that. When I got the opportunity to do that, which is kind of it's baseball equivalent of AAA, when I got the opportunity to do that, I started thinking, this is something I might want to do if Mike steps away at some point. And then when it was announced that Mike was indeed stepping away, I made my thoughts known, saying, hey, I'd like to be the next guy. Well, they decided to bring Paul Page back, who had stepped away from television after an illustrious career, and I fully supported that, and I understood that because he's Paul Page. I mean, I get that, the name recognition and the respect that he brings immediately. And I'll say I enjoyed working with Paul the 2 years that I was with him, and Paul leaned on me heavily and showed a lot of faith in me. And then when it was announced that Paul was leaving the network, I interviewed with our IMS Productions president at the time and our network director, and I just told him, I said, this has been a stepping stone for years for others. To go into television, Bob Jenkins, Paul Page, Kevin Lee, Vince Welch, and the list goes on and on and on. And I said, I don't have any intentions of following that path. I have been, am, and always will be a radio guy, and this network means everything in the world to me. And it was about 6 weeks later that I was actually on duty as assistant athletic director at Beech Grove, and our network director, Wally Levitt, came to cover a swim meet, came to see me at a swim meet on a Saturday afternoon. And we were just talking outside the pool, and all of a sudden he goes, well, Robbie wanted me to come and tell you, you're the next anchor of the IMS Radio Network. And I thought I was going to fall on the floor. I mean, my knees literally started shaking. And so I shook his hand and I thanked him. And I went into the gym and there was no one in there. And I literally, at 50 years old, broke down and cried. And obviously called my wife pretty quickly and broke the news to her. But I couldn't tell anyone else because they didn't want to go public with it for about a week or so because our president at the time of the company was out of town. And so, it was I didn't tell my children, I didn't tell anybody. I told my wife, and that was it. And so it was pretty cool. The reception and the positive response that it received when it finally happened.
And you're only the sixth person to sit in that chair.
About 70 years now, yeah.
And
start with Sid Collins.
Yeah, would you just go through and name them?
Yeah, Sid Collins was the first anchor, and then Paul Page took over for Sid. And then after Paul, Lou Palmer was the anchor for a couple of years, and then Bob Jenkins, and then Mike King, and then Paul for 2 years, and then this will be my fifth as the anchor, taking over for Paul.
So you've said that each anchor has put their stamp on that chair and on the broadcast. What would you say your stamp has been so far?
I think as much as anything, I don't put myself front and center of the show. You say, well, how can you do that if you're the anchor and if you're the voice of the 500? First of all, Paul Page has all but threatened me to start referring to myself as the voice of the 500. I've not been comfortable with that moniker, but Paul has. Hey, look, he said, you've earned it, you've got to own it. And so I'm doing that a bit more now. But, people ask me, well, how much pit strategy do you study? How much fuel and tires do you study? Well, I don't really study a lot of that because I've had Anders Krohn the last couple of years, and then Davey Hamilton comes back this year. That's their job. Well, what about actually what goes on pit road? Well, I don't need to do that either, because I've got Rob Howden and Ryan Marine, and I've got Dave First, and and Rob Blackman now. And in terms of play-by-play, I've got Dick Yeoman and Michael Young and Jake Query and Chris Denary. And so, just stay out of their way and let them do their job. And I've said, I'm okay with that setup until maybe they start paying me by the word. If they pay me by the word, we might have to rethink this process a little bit. But, I think the thing that always impressed me the most about Bob Jenkins is the fact that Bob let the show be the show. Bob didn't want to be the show. And that's not to say that our other anchors have done things any differently than Bob. But Bob was more the facilitator and more the conductor. I mean, it's getting to the elements, getting to the commercials, letting people know where we are in the race and things of that nature. And that's the stamp that I think that I would leave. My hope is that everyone that has worked with me appreciates the fact that I value their roles, and I want to give them the full opportunity to put their talents on display.
I think it says a lot about you as a person and as a leader that you don't want yourself front and center. You surrounded yourself with people that are smarter than you in different areas.
Yeah, that's not hard to do.
But that's a sign of a true leader.
Yeah,
so
thank you.
I appreciate that. So one of the things you brought back was the anthem, right?
Yeah, there were a lot of the pre-race festivities that every anchor put a different spin on it, and my philosophy was that because radio is such a theater of the mind, that we have the ability, I think, with the technology that we have, to make people feel as though they are here when they're not. And so what I did is there is a field producer that cues the guys in the public address booth in terms of what the next element is, whether it's TAPS or God Bless America or the Command or Back Home Again in Indiana and all that. And one of our pit reporters is standing right next to that pit producer in their booth, and they are counting me down in my ear. And there may be 10 to 15 seconds from one element to the other. Well, to me, I think it gives people a better feeling of being here if I don't say anything at all during that 15 seconds and just allow these 300,000 people to start pulling that listener in and make them feel like they're here. So that kind of explains, my approach to the pre-race show. Again, letting the event be front and center, not feeling as though that you have to introduce every element and every segment. And I'm okay with allowing the guys on the PA like Dave Calabro and Bob Jenkins and those guys to handle those duties.
Now, because I was texting you on race day this last race, I was in Colorado in the mountains listening to you on an app, and I was listening to it, and you're exactly right. You were quiet, and I felt like I was just here.
Yeah, thank you.
And I had a bird's eye view, and my mind just took care of the colors and everything else. It was great.
Yeah,
I experienced that.
We this year, we moved this last year for the 500. We moved from the 9th floor of the pagoda to this spot on the 4th floor, and to that end, there's a patio right outside of our booth, and our engineers were actually able to set up a table and a couple of headsets and boxes out there, and we did the first 45 minutes of pre-race show from outside.
Yeah.
And I know when Governor Holcomb came to do his annual interview, which he comes every year, he was just blown away at the fact that we were able to stand outside and be that close to the fans and the pageantry and all of that.
Yeah.
And that was another way for us to kind of bring people closer to the event.
That's great. Let's talk a little bit more about race day. When do you start preparing for race day for the broadcast?
Well, as a matter of fact, I met with our network director, Chris Pollock, yesterday, and we started, kind of mapping our broadcast schedule out. But in terms of the 500 pre-race show itself, we'll probably start putting that together, coming up with ideas and elements and things of that nature, probably sometime in mid to late March.
Okay.
And then, it's just a natural progression as we move closer to the month of May. But I would say the preparation amps up after the Grand Prix, which starts off the month of May, for sure.
Can you walk us through your day of routine? It's race day.
I sleep a little better than I used to because I've gotten more accustomed to it. But I'll get up in the morning and have coffee with my wife, and then sometimes she'll come, but she doesn't a lot because she usually gets together with our children and grandchildren on race day and some friends. And then I live about 4 blocks away, so I walk over, and I try to get over here right around 6 or 6:15. And I go down to the pit wall first and just kind of sit there and take it all in. And then I come up to the booth, and I like getting to the booth that early because nobody's here. And I try to connect myself to Sid and Lou and Mike and Bob and Paul and what their thoughts were on race day. I go back over the pre-race show and see if there's any changes that have to be made to the structure and the timing of it. And then as the place literally comes to life before my very eyes, I've got, either television or radio responsibilities in terms of interviews. And then people start to roll in, and we have a light breakfast in the morning and have a production meeting, and then we're off and running from that point on.
And most of you all have done it for so long, you just know what's expected and what's coming. And
yeah, there's not a lot to discuss in terms of our production meeting because I've got an incredible amount of trust in these people, and I know that they know what they're doing, and we just wish them well, and we all express our appreciation for the opportunity to do this, and wish one another well, and we're off and running.
So radio broadcast side only, how many people are on the crew? Like, how many people does it take to make that day happen?
We'll let people do the math as I describe it. We have 4 pit reporters and 4 turn announcers.
Okay.
And then we have someone stationed to handle the garage and hospital. One person kind of goes between those two. And then in the booth, it's me, our driver analyst, and Donald Davidson. And then our network director usually monitors race control. We have a pit producer who talks to our pit guys. And then we have typically 2 engineers on staff and then someone running master control. So
if I counted right, I'm thinking 17.
That's right, yeah. And what, 10 of those, 12 of those are on air?
Right, yeah.
And all of those people are in my ear at one time or another while we're having to stay focused on the task at hand. And Mike King warned me of this, and he was spot on. He said, when you're done with that show, when you sign off and say so long, everybody, he said, your hands will shake because your mind is moving so fast for so long, and then you just shut it off. And, the first year I anchored for the 100th, I walked home, and, there were a number of people at our house. And I went in after I spent some time with my grandson. I went in, my wife followed me in, and I poured myself a glass of tea, and I went downstairs. And she said, what's wrong? And I said, I'm exhausted, mentally and physically and emotionally exhausted. And I said, I don't want all of these people here next year. I just don't. I love them, and I appreciate their support. And it's funny how it affects everybody differently, because I talked to Bob Jenkins about that, and Bob said, oh, no, that wasn't me at all. He said, I always had a lot of people over to the house. We had a big party and everything else, and that's the way I wound down. And I'll go downstairs, and I'll watch either the rebroadcast or flip between that and the Coca-Cola 600, watch our friends from NASCAR run their race on Sunday night, and I just I would say it's probably 4, 5, 6 o'clock the next day before I honestly feel like that I'm squared away and back where I was beforehand. Yeah, it's now I don't feel that way when we go to Long Beach or St. Petersburg or Iowa. It's not that I don't enjoy those events, I do. But I don't feel that way after those are done.
That's interesting.
But for this, just because of the sheer magnitude of it and all that's involved, and the massive responsibility and the pressure you put on yourself to perform, and again, I think what I've hit on in my previous 4 years as anchor is the fact that your mind's just moving so fast for so long, and then all of a sudden you just shut it off, and there is a recovery process, or at least that's the way it is for me.
Okay, I want to play a speed round here.
Okay.
Best IndyCar driver not living?
Bill Vukovich.
Best IndyCar driver retired but living?
Rick Mears.
How long have you been married?
33 years.
How many kids do you have?
2.
When you travel, do you only eat at local restaurants, or will you eat at chain restaurants?
I'll tell you, it's got to be late at night for I'll do a chain.
Yes, I agree with you.
Doesn't make any sense to me.
Yep, I agree. Best current driver?
Alexander Rossi.
Best race you've ever called?
2006 Indianapolis 500 with Sam Hornish Jr. and Marco Andretti.
Oh, yeah. Now, what made that so special?
Just the way it finished. I mean, I was in turn 3, and when Marco shoved him down into the grass on the next to the last lap, I didn't think there was any way at all that Sam could catch him. I thought that 19-year-old rookie had, and Kyle Moyer, who at the time was Marco's race strategist and the team president for Andretti Autosport. He's also an 82 graduate of Monrovia High School, by the way. Kyle told me earlier that year that Marco was going to win the 500.
Oh, wow.
He said because that race is best suited to his driving style. And he came, within less than 25, 30 yards of winning it, just a couple of tenths of a second. And that was a cool thing to be a part of.
Well, my next question was best finish, but I think you just answered that.
Yeah, there's some conversation that me and Bob and Donald have had. I think Bob's call of the 92 win by Allinger Jr. over Scott Goodyear is right there. And then I think probably Paul's call of John Cock beating Rick Mears. And then probably our 06 finish with Marco and Sam. I think those are the top 3 all time.
You answered this earlier, but I'm asking again. Best pizza in Indiana?
Doghouse Pizza.
Yeah, Monrovia. Best
Call
pie?
Huh?
Best pie?
Oh, Gray Brothers. I mean, you can't. That's...
This has been the best interview you've ever done. Say you agree?
I would agree. Today.
What's your favorite meal?
Salmon patties, macaroni and cheese, and spinach.
Wow. That actually sounds really good.
My wife, I'll tell you what, she picked up my mother's recipe and she nails it.
Really?
Yeah, well done.
All right, we're almost done here.
Okay.
I'll say a name, you say the first thing that comes to mind. You ready?
Yep.
AJ Foyt.
Legend.
Arie Luyendyk.
Fast.
My favorite race car driver, by the way. Graham Rahal.
Perhaps underrated.
Very interesting. Just the family Andretti.
Oh, class. Class, and I think there are just a handful of names, I think, that immediately connect you to motorsports, and that's certainly one of them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Tom Sneva.
Gas man.
Yeah. Al Unser Sr.?
Legend. I mean, 4-time winner. My gosh. I mean, and every win was different for him. But he drove my first favorite. He wasn't my first favorite driver. He drove my first favorite race car, the Johnny Lightning Special, that he won back-to-back in 70 and 71. And when you see it in the museum, you look at the side of that car, and, I'm dating myself here, but when you think about Murderers Row with the New York Yankees, right, with Gehrig and Ruth and those guys, you look down the side of that car, and Parnelli Jones owned it, George Bignotti was the chief mechanic, and Al Sr. was the driver. I mean, no wonder they won 2 races.
I know,
I mean,
exactly.
That's awesome.
What about his son, Al Unser Jr.?
I think a 2-time winner, had it not been for a dust-up with M.O. in Turn 2, could have been a 3-time winner, but a legend in the sport. And when you go to places like Long Beach, where he won multiple times, I mean, the reverence that people still feel for Al Unser Jr. is impressive.
Mary Holman George.
I think class. I think dignity. I think a philanthropic person, and never ever, to my knowledge, mistreated anyone.
It's quite a legacy.
Yeah, for sure.
2011, J.R. Hildebrand and Dan Weldon. Do you remember that race?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
What do you remember most about it?
Well, I told Chris Denary this. Chris has been in Turn 4 for a number of years, and I said, Chris, unless a member of the Indiana Pacers hits a last-second shot to win an NBA championship, you will never have a call as the voice of the Pacers that will be as infamous as your call of J.R. Hildebrand hitting the wall on the last lap of the 500.
Yeah, it's epic.
Yeah, I mean, it's and he hits the wall. I mean, the level of disbelief in his voice, I think, summed it up beautifully for everyone.
It did.
And I will say this: I became a fan of J.R. Hildebrand that day because he owned every bit of that. Never shied away from it. He didn't go in the garage and shut the door, even though he lost the biggest race of his life. And who knows? If this place is as full of ifs and buts as any, who knows how much differently J.R. Hildebrand's career is if he wins that race instead of Dan Weldon, and vice versa.
Yeah. Absolutely. Do you remember when Emerson Fittipaldi drank the orange juice instead of the milk?
Yeah.
You have any thoughts about that?
I think we now know that nothing stays the same, good,
Yeah.
bad, or indifferent.
But it was so new then.
Yeah, and it was a different time then, and I think I understand why he did what he did, but I also understand why there was such outrage over it. But again, I think all in all, I think Emo's he's got a heck of a legion of fans all around the world, and I think while certainly that does come up from time to time when his name is mentioned, I think people also remember him as one of the greatest, multi-discipline drivers that ever lived.
So recently, Bob Knight finally made his reappearance at Assembly Hall in Bloomington. Mm-hmm. And he's walking out. He's obviously aged quite a bit. But one of the things that stood out to me, and I'm not afraid to admit, I teared up when I saw that.
Sure.
I grew up watching the General.
Yeah.
Watched him sometimes more than you watch the game.
Right.
What I noticed was there's a lot of people in the crowd that didn't even really know who he was.
Right.
That younger generation. They maybe clapped because mom and dad liked him. Mm-hmm. So it leads up to this question. For the generation that's going through high school right now, how do you explain to them why the Indy 500 is the greatest spectacle in racing?
Well, I think honestly, in order for them to get a full appreciation for it, they have to be here. I mean, I think you can sell them on the spectacle of it if they listen to the broadcast or they watch the broadcast. They can see all the people here and see the pomp and circumstance, but I think you have to be here to feel it and experience it from start to finish. And I think that is what connects you to the history and the tradition of it. Very seldom, if ever, have I heard of anyone saying, I went once and didn't care if I ever went back. The overwhelming majority of the people said the only thing I could think of when I left there is when I was going to get back or how I was going to get back. And I'll admit, I guess it's like a disease. I mean, it gets into your system and it's very, very difficult to get out. It's one of the few places in the world that I've found that is as impressive empty as it is today as it is full on race day, just because the magnitude of it. And to stop and think that for the most part, there's very little about this racetrack in terms of the surface itself. I mean, we had bricks for a while and everything, but in terms of the layout, that's not changed since 1911. Some elements of it have, and certainly our world's vastly different than it was then. But I think, it's pretty cool to me when I come here on race day or come here anytime throughout the month of May. And I think there are a lot of second and third generation, fourth generation, maybe even fifth generation fans of this place that are making sure that its legacy continues on through their children. When I see them, walking through the pagoda or going out to the fan zone on race day or on carb day or certainly on qualifying days, which is cool.
And do you think this generation of drivers understand and cherish it the way the drivers did in the older days?
Oh, I don't think there's any question because, as Simon Pagenaud stated, it changes the way that you were introduced.
Oh, that's true.
Nobody talks about Allenser Jr. being a multiple Long Beach winner. I mean, Allenser Jr. is introduced as a two-time Indy 500 champion. Eddie Cheever is an Indy 500 champion.
That's really,
it changes the way you're introduced for sure.
Okay, in conclusion, what are some of the changes that Roger Penske has announced, and what are your thoughts on them being implemented?
Well, I know in my experience traveling with the series, what Roger has done at Belle Isle and Detroit is nothing short of spectacular. He puts between 130 to 150,000 people on Belle Isle over Friday, Saturday, and Sunday every year in early June off the 500. He's pumped over $13 million in improvements in that island up there.
Wow.
In his time that he and Bud Dinker and those folks have been in charge of that event. I've talked to people that worked at California Speedway when Roger owned it in Fontana. I've talked to people that saw Michigan when he bought it, what it looked like when he sold it. He's got a passion and enthusiasm for motorsports as a whole, but in particular a reverence for this place. And I think the sky's the limit. I really do. I mean, I think it's going to be fun to watch it all unfold.
I agree.
Because I think first and foremost, while he is a businessman, he's a fan. And he wants to make sure that each and every person that comes through the gate enjoys this place as much as he does. And I think that's a pretty good steward moving forward for not only this facility, but the series as a whole.
As you look back from the last year's race to this race, doing an interview, I'd be remiss if I didn't just give us an opportunity to talk about John Andretti and the passing, and his passing.
Yeah, I mean, John certainly turned a negative into a positive, and it's hard to tell not only how many lives John has saved and will continue to save with the campaign to get screened for colon cancer, but let's not discount the millions of dollars he's raised through the Race for Riley at Riley Children's Hospital and the families and the children that have benefited from that. John always had a smile on his face. He was our analyst on the radio network for the Brickyard for a number of years, and I had a chance to interview John when he would run IndyCar, and what you see is what you got with John Andretti. Just a kind man and a multi-talented driver. I mean, he was one of those cut from the same cloth as a Tony Stewart or an A.J. Foyt. If it had wheels and a motor, John Andretti would climb in it, and he'd find a way to make it go fast. It's a tremendous loss for the racing community, and he's certainly going to be sorely missed.
Lastly, but not least, I want to give shout out to Monrovia Bulldogs, your Bulldogs.
Yeah.
So tell us what you do there, and just talk about what the kids are doing some awesome stuff around there.
Yeah, thank you. It's my third year as a communications director and a communications instructor at Monrovia High School. Dr. William Roberson, who's been connected with Mooresville Schools for a number of years, he and our principal, Mike Springer, instrumental, along with our AD at the time, Brian Lewis, in bringing me back to Monrovia. To start a communications program. And it's called radio television because it has to be, but it is primarily television production. The kids get a chance to do play-by-play. They do interviews like this. They do news stories. We do a twice weekly news show. We've got a level 1, a level 2, and an interactive media that is more Facebook and Twitter and slide presentations and PowerPoints and things of that nature. But we post a lot on the high school's Facebook page. Just like, for instance, yesterday, our principal came to me and said, hey, we've got I-STEP testing next week for sophomores. We need to kind of let parents know what all that encompasses. So I grab my aide 6th period. We go down to his office, set up a camera. We do a quick interview with him and post it on Facebook. And so parents don't have to come to us for information. We can take it to them, which is what we prefer. And I think the response has been overwhelmingly positive. I'm pleased that I have 2 seniors this year who one is going to IU for telecommunications and the other is going to Ball State. And so, I don't know that they choose that path without our program. But since, Dr. Roberson left 2 years ago, Dr. Kirk Freeman took over as superintendent. And the support has not wavered. And Todd Evers is now our athletic director. Brian Lewis went back to Jasper, and same thing with Todd. So, in order for you to be successful as a teacher, as a coach, and no matter what you do, you simply must have administrative support. And I don't know that I could have any better support than I do from those folks at our board of trustees. And additionally, they allow me to continue to travel with the IndyCar series, and I do some work for the IHSAA as well, and they're tremendously supportive of that. They see a value in it, and I'm thankful for that.
Mark, you're a good guy. I'm thankful that you took a 4th grader in me and let me be your friend, and that we've been friends all this time.
Yeah,
Thanks for being my guest.
My pleasure. Good stuff. Thank you.